Lake Thunderbird was a serene expanse of water, reflecting the rays of the setting sun. Michael Johnson sat on the bow of the boat, sipping beer from a bottle and gazing out at the water. The June evening was warm, and the air smelled of cut grass and lilies. Somewhere in the distance, seagulls screeched, breaking the silence. Lorraine, his wife, sat in the middle of the boat, nervously tugging at the hem of her summer dress. Her dark skin glistened in the light of the setting sun. She tried to appear relaxed, but Michael noticed her exchanging glances with Derek, who was rowing in the stern. Derek Walters, Michael's best friend since college. At least that's what he'd thought until recently. A sturdy man with broad shoulders and a serious look that was now too focused on rowing to be natural. Michael took another sip of his beer, pretending not to notice their interjections. For the past few weeks, he'd suspected something was going on between Lorraine and Derek. The casual touches, the long stares, the sudden disappearances, everything pointed to infidelity. And now this strange trip to the lake they'd both been so insistent on. "How about another beer?" Lorraine asked, reaching into the cooler bag. "Yeah, why not?" Michael replied, though there was still beer in the bottom of his bottle. He noticed Derek nodding to Lorraine as if signaling. Michael was a former swimmer. In college, he'd been one of the best in the state of Oklahoma, even considered for the Olympic team, but a shoulder injury had ended his career. The skills remained, however. He could hold his breath for 4 minutes, long enough to fool anyone. Lorraine held out an open bottle to him. Michael took it, took a sip, and felt a strange taste. He discreetly spit the beer back into the bottle. Something wasn't right. Sleeping pills? Poison? He didn't know, but he was sure he was going to be killed. "Let's swim farther out, the fish bite better there," Derek suggested, steering the boat toward the center of the lake. "Good idea," Michael agreed, pretending to drink his beer. His brain was working feverishly, assessing the situation. Their 6-year-old daughter Tiffany was left at home with a babysitter. Had they really planned this when their daughter was safe? The boat glided along the water surface, moving away from the shore. Derek rowed steadily. Lorraine glanced at her watch. Michael placed the bottle in the bottom of the boat and discreetly picked up a small rock that had been lying there as ballast, just in case. "How beautiful it is out here," Lorraine pronounced, looking at the horizon. "You know, I've always dreamed of seeing a sunset on the lake." "Yes, the sunset here is beautiful," Michael replied, watching her face carefully. Lorraine had never been a good actress. Her nervousness was betrayed by her twitching fingers and artificial smile. "Feeling okay, Mike?" Derek asked, stopping paddling. "You're kind of pale." "A little dizzy," Michael lied, pretending to be wobbly. "Maybe too much beer?" Lorraine asked with feigned concern. "Probably." Michael shook his head as if trying to come to his senses. "Yeah, definitely too much." He noticed Derek and Lorraine exchange quick glances. This was the beginning of their plan. Michael decided to play into their hands. "I need a dip," he muttered, rising to his feet and deliberately fumbling. "Refresh myself." "Maybe you shouldn't," Lorraine objected without much enthusiasm. "You've been drinking. It's dangerous." "It's okay," Michael waved it off. "I'm a swimmer, remember?" He took off his t-shirt, leaving him in shorts, and stood on the edge of the boat. The boat rocked. Derek and Lorraine looked at him with poorly concealed anticipation. "Be careful not to capsize the boat," Derek said with feigned concern. Michael nodded, and then, as if losing his balance, fell into the water with a loud splash. As he went under, he caught sight of Derek's arm around Lorraine's shoulders. Underwater, Michael opened his eyes. The lake was murky, but he could see the dark outline of the boat overhead. He swam to the side, underwater, using his silent swimming skills. Then he stopped, relaxed his muscles, and allowed himself to slowly surface, but not fully, just to grab some air while remaining undetected. He could hear their voices over the water. "Where is he?" It was Lorraine. You could hear the tension in her voice. "I don't know. Should have surfaced by now," Derek replied. "Maybe the medicine took effect faster than we thought?" "Look! There!" Lorraine shouted. Michael dove deeper so he wouldn't be seen. He could hear them talking over each other, and Derek rowing, moving the boat. He held his breath and swam underwater, using the current to carry him further away from the boat. Years of training had not gone to waste. He could cover a considerable distance without rising to the surface. As his lungs began to burn, he cautiously rose to take a breath and saw that the boat was a few dozen meters away. Derek and Lorraine were looking the other way, gazing out into the water. "He couldn't have drowned that fast," he heard Lorraine's voice. "We've got to find him." "Maybe the medicine made him choke," Derek replied. "Look harder." Michael realized his plan was working. They believed he had drowned or was drowning. He dived again and swam toward the opposite shore, using the current to his advantage. When he finally reached the shallow water, he was well away from the scene. Michael carefully waded ashore in a thicket of reeds where no one could see him. He was exhausted, but determined. After catching his breath, he made his way through the bushes to a small rise overlooking the lake. The boat with Lorraine and Derek was still circling the spot where he had drowned. He saw them nervously surveying the water. Then Derek pulled out his cell phone and seemed to dial a number. Police. Lifeguards would soon be here looking for his body. Michael realized he didn't have much time. He must disappear before the shoreline was cordoned off. Hiding behind trees and bushes, he walked around the lake, heading in the direction of the nearest town. He was only wearing wet shorts, but that was the least of his problems. A plan was forming in his head as he walked. When he heard the police sirens and saw the flashing beacons on the road to the lake, he knew time was short. He made his way to the parking lot next to the fishing store. There were several cars here, fishermen spending the evening on the lake. Michael found an open pickup truck with fishing gear in the back seat. In the glove compartment was an old t-shirt and baseball cap. He quickly put them on and ducked down and headed for the parking lot exit on foot, trying to look like a normal fisherman returning home. When a police car drove by with its sirens on, he pulled his baseball cap lower and turned away. The car sped past without paying any attention to him. Michael made his way to a gas station on the way out of town. Here, he found a payphone and called his longtime friend Eric, who lived 3 hours away. "Eric, it's Michael. I'm in trouble. Can you come get me? I'm at the gas station by Thunderbird Lake." His voice sounded strained but firm. "Michael? What's wrong, brother?" Eric's voice sounded concerned. "You're on your own. I'll explain everything when I meet you. It's urgent," Michael replied, looking around. Eric was silent for a second. "Okay, I'll be there in 3 hours." Michael hung up the phone and walked into the small store at the gas station. There was a small television showing the local news. He froze when he saw footage of Thunderbird Lake and the headline at the bottom of the screen, "Man allegedly drowned during evening fishing trip." The camera showed police cars, lifeguards on boats illuminating the water with spotlights, and Lorraine sobbing on the shore, with Derek supporting her by the shoulders. Their acting was flawless. Two grief-stricken people who had lost a close friend and husband. "Terrible tragedy," the cashier shook his head, noticing Michael watching the news. "They say the guy was drunk. I've never understood why people drink on the water." Michael nodded silently, lowering his head so the cashier wouldn't get a good look at his face. He bought the water and went outside, finding a dark place behind the building to wait for Eric. Time stretched slowly. Police cars passed by the gas station. Once a black police car pulled up to the store, and a tall woman in a suit got out. A detective. Michael retreated deeper into the shadows. The detective entered the store and began talking to the cashier, showing him a photograph. Michael realized it was a picture of him. She asked if the cashier had seen the man. Detective Charlene Baker was known in their small town for her persistence and observation. If anyone could suspect something amiss in his accident, it was her. Michael lurched, watching as the detective exited the store and looked around carefully before getting back into her car. For a moment, he thought she was looking directly at him, but then she drove off. Finally, at almost midnight, Eric's old blue Ford pulled into the gas station. Michael quickly got in the car, and they drove off. "Jesus, Michael, what's going on? The news says you drowned." Eric cast worried glances at him, trying to keep his eyes on the road at the same time. "They tried to kill me, Eric," Michael said quietly, looking out at the night scenery whizzing by. "Lorraine and Derek, they put something in my beer and hoped I'd drown." "What? That's crazy. Why would they do that?" "They're together. Have been for months, probably longer. Also, the insurance is $500,000 if I die. Eric whistled. So what are you going to do? Report me to the police? Michael shook his head. There's no proof. It'll be my word against theirs. And they've already made a play for a grief-stricken spouse and friend. Besides, they might try again. So what then? Michael was silent, gathering his thoughts. I'll disappear. Start a new life somewhere far away from here. And what about Tiffany? Your daughter? Michael clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. That's the hardest part. She's only 6. She won't understand. And she won't be able to keep a secret like that. If I contact her, Lorraine will know I'm alive, and Tiffany could be in danger. Eric nodded, understanding. And where will you go? Arizona, I guess. I have no one there, no connections. I'll need to change my appearance, my name. Can you help me with the paperwork? I have an acquaintance, but it won't be easy and it won't be cheap. Money isn't a problem. I have a secret account that Lorraine doesn't know about. I've always been careful. They drove in silence, each immersed in his own thoughts. Michael looked up at the starry sky through the car window, thinking about how his life had changed in a few hours. He had lost his family, his home, his name, everything. But he was alive and determined to return one day and bring justice. The next morning, Eric turned on the television in the motel where they were staying. The news was showing Thunderbird Lake again. Rescuers were still searching for Michael's body. According to witnesses, the reporter was saying, Michael Johnson, 32 years old, was on a boat with his wife and a friend when he decided to go swimming. Presumably, while under the influence of alcohol, he drowned. The search for the body continues. The camera showed Lorraine being interviewed by Detective Baker. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke. Michael was such a good man. He loved the lake. He loved to swim. I don't understand how this could have happened. Derek stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, the perfect embodiment of support and grief. We've been best friends since college. I can't believe he's gone. Detective Baker frowned as she listened to them. Doubt read in her eyes. Turn it off, Michael said. He couldn't watch this anymore. What now? Eric asked. We need to change our appearance, get new identities, start from scratch. Over the next few days, Michael underwent a transformation. He shaved off his curly hair, grew a beard, and began wearing plain-rimmed glasses. Eric contacted an acquaintance who, for a decent amount of money, provided Michael with a new passport, driver's license, and social security number in the name of Marcus James. A week later, he was in Phoenix, Arizona, renting a small apartment and preparing to start a new life. He took a job as a swim coach at a local athletic club, a job he was familiar with, and one that didn't require too much paperwork or background checks. In the evenings, he sat on the balcony of his new apartment, watching the sunset and thinking about Tiffany. He missed her every minute, but knew it would be too dangerous to go back now. He had to disappear so that he could one day be able to come back and protect his daughter. I'll be back, Tiffany, he whispered, looking at the picture of his daughter that he had saved before he ran away. I promise. Meanwhile, back in Oklahoma, Detective Charlene Baker sat at her desk, studying the incident reports from Thunderbird Lake. Something about the story kept her on edge. Michael Johnson was an accomplished swimmer. How could he have drowned? And why hadn't the body been found yet? She opened the folder with Michael's insurance information, $500,000 in death benefits. That's a lot of money. And the beneficiary was his wife, Lorraine. Baker leaned back in her chair, pondering. There's something wrong here, she muttered. But without a body, without proof, there was nothing she could do, at least not yet. Phoenix, Arizona greeted Marcus James, formerly Michael Johnson, with a scorching sun and dry air. Living in the desert was very different from the humid climate of Oklahoma, but it made it feel like a truly different world. A new reality with no past, without family, no betrayal. A small apartment on the east side of town became his home. Minimalist furnishings, a couch, a desk, a bed, and a few shelves of books. No pictures on the walls except one hidden in a desk drawer, a picture of 6-year-old Tiffany from her last birthday party he'd attended. At Golden Sands Athletic Club, Marcus quickly gained a reputation as an excellent swim coach. His students were achieving impressive results, some even advancing to regional competitions. Colleagues respected him for his professionalism, but considered him unsociable. No one knew about his past. No one knew his real name. "Marcus, would you like to join us on Friday? We're meeting at a bar on 4th Avenue," Janet, a colleague in the fitness department, often asked. "Sorry, weekend plans," he invariably replied. Those plans were always the same. A drive of a few hours to the state line, where, in a small internet cafe, he would create anonymous profiles and search for information about his daughter and ex-wife. In the first year of living like this, Michael had lost weight, his hair showing early gray. His eyes, which used to glow with energy, became serious and wary. On social media, he found Lorraine's page. Without being added as a friend, he could see public photos. 7 months after his death, she updated her status to engaged. Another 5 months later, wedding photos with Derek appeared. The image of the grieving widow melted away quickly. In the first year of his disappearance, Michael took the risky step of secretly traveling to his hometown in Oklahoma. Changing his appearance, wearing dark glasses and a cap, he watched his former home from afar. Saw Tiffany playing in the yard under the supervision of a babysitter. She'd grown up, but he'd recognize her anywhere. Lorraine and Derek looked happy. They bought a new car with the insurance money. That same year, they renovated the house that had once belonged to Michael. Over the years, the visits got more frequent. Every 3 or 4 months, Michael would take a vacation from work and drive to Oklahoma. He would stay in a motel on the outskirts of town, rent a car, and watch his daughter's life from afar. He watched her walk to school, a proud first grader with a huge backpack over her shoulders, watched her first performance in the school choir, once even ventured to attend an open school concert sitting in the back row. The internet became his window into Tiffany's life. When she turned 10, she got her first social networking account. Michael, having created a fake profile with the name Marcus Reed, became one of her first friends. She accepted all requests without hesitation. "Hi," he wrote once, but immediately deleted the message. Too risky. Instead, he watched in silence as she posted children's drawings, photos with her friends, stories about school events. In the 3rd year of his new life, photos of her with bottles of wine, then stronger drinks, began to appear on Lorraine's page. In the comments, friends joked about her addiction to alcohol, at first harmlessly, then with a note of concern. "Lorraine, will you stop it? 3rd day in a row? Girl, you need to slow down. Tiffany needs a sober mom." Derek had changed too. From snippets of information on social media, Michael learned that he was having trouble at work. There had been layoffs at the construction company where he was a manager. Derek began drinking with Lorraine. When Tiffany turned 13, her social media posts changed. Cheerful posts and brightly colored photos were replaced by somber quotes and black and white images. She began posting photos of her and Lorraine and Derek together less often. They no longer appeared at school events. One day, Michael noticed Tiffany's new posting. It was a normal selfie in the school bathroom, but something about it alarmed him. Looking closer, he noticed a barely visible bruise on the girl's neck, which she tried to hide with the high collar of her sweater. In the comments, a friend asked, "What's wrong with your neck?" To which Tiffany replied, "Nothing much. I bumped it accidentally." Michael felt anxiety building up inside. He continued to study her profile and noticed several other similar accidental injuries in recent months. Too many coincidences. That same evening, he decided to resume his visits to Oklahoma. Each year, he became more cautious, changing cars, staying in different motels, never getting too close to home or school. But concern for his daughter outweighed the fear of being discovered. On his next visit, he noticed that the house, once well-maintained and neat, had begun to deteriorate. The paint on the porch was peeling, and empty bottles were lying around in the yard. One evening, he heard a loud argument coming from the open windows. Derek was yelling, something had broken. Lorraine was sobbing. Michael sat in the rental car, clutching the steering wheel, fighting the urge to barge in and protect his family. But he knew that would hurt them all. He was legally dead. His sudden reappearance would raise questions that could lead to charges against him as well, for faking his death and avoiding responsibility. When Tiffany turned 15, Michael began to notice even more troubling signs. She lost weight, became withdrawn. Hints of depression and hopelessness appeared in her posts. She once wrote, "Sometimes I think it would be easier to just disappear. No one would even notice." This message frightened Michael the most. He realized that the situation was critical, and he could no longer stay in the shadows. After 10 years of living under a false identity, it was time to come back and protect his daughter. At the Golden Sands Club, he tendered his resignation. The director was surprised and upset, offered a promotion, but Michael was adamant. "Family reasons," he explained. "I need to come home." "I didn't know you had a family, Marcus," the director marveled. "I do," Michael replied quietly. "And she needs me." He packed the few belongings he had into 2 bags, turned in his apartment, and left Phoenix without looking back. For 10 years, this city had been his refuge, but never his home. Back in Oklahoma, Michael rented a small house on the outskirts of town, near Thunderbird Lake. The bedroom window overlooked the same stretch of lake where Derek and Lorraine had tried to kill him 10 years ago. Sometimes at night he would stare out at the dark water surface, remembering the night that had changed everything. Michael realized he couldn't just show up on his doorstep and make himself known. He had to proceed with caution. First and foremost, he decided to gather evidence of Tiffany's abuse. To do this, he began documenting everything he saw, taking photos of bruises, recording the dates of the incidents, saving screenshots of disturbing social media posts. He also began observing their daily lives more closely, discovered that Lorraine hardly ever left the house, except for occasional trips to the store for alcohol. Derek worked part-time at a construction site, often missing shifts. Tiffany spent most of her time at school or at the public library, apparently trying to be homeless. Michael decided he needed allies. He thought of Detective Charlene Baker, who had investigated his drowning. She didn't believe in the accident version of the story, but she couldn't find any evidence. Perhaps 10 years later, she was still on the police force. Careful inquiries in town confirmed his assumptions. Baker was now a lieutenant in the homicide division. Michael knew a meeting with her was inevitable if he wanted to get justice, but decided to put it off until he had gathered enough evidence against Derek. One evening, watching the house from a safe distance, Michael saw Tiffany return from school later than usual. She was carrying a folder with some papers and looked enthusiastic. As she walked up the porch, Derek came out of the house. Even from a distance, it was obvious that he was drunk. Michael couldn't hear their conversation, but he saw Tiffany excitedly show something to her stepfather. He took the papers, took a quick look at them, and started yelling something, then crumpled the sheet and threw it on the ground. The girl's face changed from joy to fear and frustration. Derek continued to yell, waving his arms. Tiffany stood with her head down. Then she bent down to pick up the crumpled paper, and at that moment Derek grabbed her arm roughly, yanking it with such force that the girl cried out in pain. Michael felt the blood rush to his face with anger. He gripped the steering wheel of the car he was sitting in tighter, fighting the urge to jump out and intervene. But he knew it wasn't time yet. He must act deliberately to protect Tiffany for real. Derek continued to hold the girl's hand, yelling in her face. Then he pushed her toward the door of the house with such force that she stumbled and almost fell. As they fled inside the house, Michael was still sitting in the car, clutching the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "Enough," he whispered. "This has to end." Michael pulled out his phone and snapped a few pictures of the house, lifted the collar of his jacket, and got out of the car. He cautiously walked closer, trying not to attract the attention of the neighbors. On the ground by the porch, he saw a crumpled piece of paper, the same one Derek had thrown away. Picking it up, Michael carefully smoothed it out and read it. It was a letter from a prestigious music school offering Tiffany a scholarship for excellence in piano playing. "Your daughter shows exceptional talent," the letter said. Michael folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. Further proof that Derek didn't care about Tiffany's future. From the house came screams and the sound of banging. Michael clenched his fists, feeling the resolve building inside. For 10 years, he had lived in silence and shadow, watching from afar as his daughter suffered. 10 years he had waited for the right moment to return. That moment has come. Back in the car, Michael took another look at the house. There were shadows flickering behind the curtains, and the sounds of the quarrel had died down. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. "County Sheriff's Office, how may I help you?" A woman's voice answered. "Good evening," Michael said, changing his voice. "I was wondering if Lieutenant Charlene Baker is still working for you." "Yes, Lieutenant Baker is in charge of the homicide division. Would you like to leave a message?" "No, thank you," Michael replied. "I'll contact her personally." He hung up the phone and started the car. Tomorrow he would meet with Detective Baker and tell her the whole truth about what had happened 10 years ago. And then together they would save Tiffany from Derek and Lorraine. Michael cast one last look at the house where he had once been happy with his family. Now that house had become a prison for his daughter, and it was time to set her free. Michael stood in front of the familiar door that he had once opened with his own key. Now he had no key, but he had determination, steely, unwavering determination. He took a deep breath and pressed the bell. There was the same melodious sound as 10 years ago. Footsteps were heard outside the door. Heavy, uneven ones. Derek. Michael straightened, preparing himself for the impending encounter. The door swung open, and there was Derek Walters, visibly aged, with a wrinkled face and a beer belly. For a second his eyes flashed with annoyance at the stranger who had disturbed the evening peace. Then his gaze focused on Michael's face. Irritation changed to bewilderment, then to disbelief, and finally to pure terror. He turned pale, as if he had indeed seen a ghost. "Impossible," Derek barely audibly muttered. You drowned." "As you can see, I didn't drown," Michael replied calmly. "Are you going to invite me in, or are we going to talk on the doorstep?" Derek staggered inside the house, unable to take his eyes off the resurrected dead man. Michael entered next, closing the door behind him. The house smelled of alcohol and dust, odors he'd never had on him. "Derek? Who's there?" Lorraine's voice came from the living room. She appeared in the hallway, gaunt, with faded eyes and premature wrinkles. In her hand was the invariable glass of wine. When she saw Michael, she froze. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the wooden floor. The red liquid spread like blood. "Michael?" she whispered, as if afraid to say the name out loud. "Jesus! Michael!" "Hello, Lorraine," he said, keeping his composure. "It's been a long time." Her gaze darted between Michael and Derek, who was still standing, frozen with shock. "But how? You drowned. We tried to kill me?" Michael finished for her. "Yes, I know you did, but as you can see, it didn't work. I've always been a good swimmer, remember?" At that moment, light footsteps were heard on the stairs. Tiffany was coming downstairs, attracted by the unusual sounds. "Mom, what's going on?" She stopped halfway down when she saw the stranger. Michael turned and looked at his daughter. The 16-year-old girl with the wary gaze bore little resemblance to the 6-year-old sunny creature he'd left 10 years ago. But the eyes, his eyes, remained the same. "Tiffany," he said with a warmth that made his voice quiver slightly. "Who are you?" she asked, shifting her gaze from the stranger to her mother, then to her stepfather. "What's going on?" Lorraine was the first to come to her senses. "Tiffany, go to your room," she ordered. "No," Michael said firmly. "She has a right to know the truth. Tiffany, my name is Michael Johnson. I'm your father." The girl frowned. "My father died when I was 6. He drowned in the lake." "That's what you've been told," Michael replied softly. "But the truth is much more complicated." Lorraine suddenly rushed to the phone. "I'm calling the police! You're crazy!" Michael didn't stop her. "That's a great idea. I'm sure Detective Baker will be glad to see me." At the mention of that name, Lorraine froze. Derek, finally coming out of his stupor, raised his voice. "What do you want, Michael? Money? We'll give you everything, just go away." "I didn't come for money," Michael replied, keeping his eyes on his daughter. "I came for the truth, and for Tiffany." The next morning, the city's police station was unusually busy. The news of the resurrected Michael Johnson spread quickly. Detective Charlene Baker, receiving an emergency call, couldn't hide her surprise and, oddly, satisfaction when she saw the man whose death she had investigated 10 years earlier. "Mr. Johnson," she pronounced, as she entered the interview room where Michael was waiting. "I must say you look fine for a drowned man." Michael smiled weakly. "Thank you, Detective. You're not bad either." Baker sat down across from him, placing a 10-year-old case file on the desk. "I never believed you were dead," she said bluntly. "There were too many inconsistencies, but there was no proof. Now I want to hear the truth." Michael told her everything. About his suspicions about Lorraine and Derek, about the strange taste of beer at the lake, about holding his breath and swimming out the other side of the lake, about his new life in Arizona. "Why are you back now?" Baker asked, taking notes. "Because of Tiffany," Michael replied. "I've been following her through social media over the years. Lately, I've noticed some troubling signs, bruises, somber postings. Drove over a few times, watched from afar. Derek's abusing her and Lorraine's drunk and doing nothing about it." Baker nodded. "We've been getting reports from neighbors about noise in their house. The school counselor expressed concern too, but each time Tiffany denied the problems, and without her testimony, there was nothing we could do." "Now I'm here," Michael said, "and ready to bring up the case of an attempted murder from 10 years ago." Baker looked at him respectfully. "It's not going to be easy. It's been a long time. There's little evidence. But if Tiffany confirms the abuse, and if Lorraine confesses, we have a chance." Michael nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." That same day, Baker questioned Lorraine and Derek separately. Lorraine, at first adamantly denying involvement in the attempted murder, gradually began to confuse her testimony. Derek was firm. He claimed that Michael had gotten drunk and drowned himself, and that his miraculous resurrection was nothing more than a clever extortion scheme. Tiffany was in the social worker's office. Her whole life had been turned upside down overnight. The father she thought was dead was alive, and her mother and stepfather were suspected of attempted murder. "Can I talk to her?" Michael asked Baker. The detective hesitated. "This is a tricky situation, Mr. Johnson. Legally, you're still considered dead. Plus, you're a stranger to Tiffany." "I'm her father," Michael said quietly. "Maybe, but that would need to be confirmed by a DNA test, and more importantly, she needs time to realize that." Michael realized that Baker was right. Tiffany couldn't be expected to accept him right away. 10 years was too long a time. A DNA test confirmed Michael's paternity 3 days later. Baker also obtained a search warrant for Lorraine and Derek's home, where evidence of abuse was found. Photos of Tiffany with bruises taken by Derek, Lorraine's diary with entries about problems with her daughter. Tiffany was temporarily placed in a foster home. Michael was able to talk to her for the first time in the presence of a social worker. "You look like you do in the pictures," Tiffany said, scrutinizing his face. "But I don't remember you. Hardly remember." "You were very young," Michael replied. "I'm sorry I wasn't around for all those years. Why didn't you come back sooner?" There was a resentment in her voice that she didn't try to hide. Michael sighed. "I was afraid. That's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I was afraid that if I came back, Derek and your mother would try to kill me again, and that it would jeopardize you." Tiffany was silent, mulling over his words. "Did they really try to kill you?" she finally asked. "Yes," Michael answered simply. "I hope your mother finds the courage to come clean." After that meeting, Lorraine, learning of the evidence found and the DNA test, broke down. In front of her lawyer, she made a confession. Yes, she and Derek had planned Michael's murder, put sleeping pills in his beer, hoping he would drown. When he disappeared underwater, they were sure the plan had worked. "We didn't check," she said through tears. "We just called the police and said he drunkenly decided to go swimming and drowned." Derek was furious when he learned of Lorraine's confession. He was arrested and charged with attempted murder and child abuse. However, he wasn't going to give up so easily. From prison, he contacted his brother, Malcolm Walters, a man with a questionable reputation and connections in the criminal world. Malcolm was to solve Michael's problem, this time definitively. Baker, sensing danger, offered Michael protection, but he refused. Instead, he offered to use himself as bait to catch Derek organizing another assassination attempt. "It's too risky," Baker objected. "It's the only way to put him behind bars for a long time," Michael replied. Otherwise, he could get out in a few years for good behavior, and then Tiffany will never be safe. Baker reluctantly agreed to the plan. The police set up surveillance on Michael and his temporary residence. All of Derek's conversations from jail were recorded. Meanwhile, Michael and Tiffany's relationship slowly improved. She began asking questions about his life before, how he and Lorraine met, what her first birthday was like. Michael answered patiently, realizing that the girl was trying to put the disparate pieces of his story together into a coherent picture. One day Tiffany asked, "Have you really been following me all these years?" "Yes," Michael replied. "I went to your first high school concert, sat in the last row, saw you win the swimming competition in 4th grade. I didn't know you were a swimmer," Tiffany said. "One of the best in the state in my day," Michael replied with a smile. "That's what saved my life back then at the lake." One evening, as Michael was walking back to his apartment, he noticed an unfamiliar car parked nearby. Inside was a man who looked like Derek. Michael knew immediately that it was Malcolm, Derek's brother. He pretended not to notice anything and entered the house, then contacted Baker on the secure line. "He's here," Michael reported. "The plan has begun to work." "Be careful," Baker replied. "Our men are close by, but don't take any unnecessary risks." At 2 a.m, Michael heard someone cracking the back door. He was ready. Hidden cameras had been installed in the house, and Michael himself wore body armor under his shirt, a suggestion Baker reluctantly agreed to. Malcolm Walters entered the bedroom, holding a silenced pistol in his hand. Michael pretended to be asleep. Malcolm took aim, but at that moment the police burst into the room. A struggle ensued, and a shot rang out. The bullet grazed Michael's shoulder, but his body armor saved him from serious injury. Malcolm was arrested on the spot. Under pressure from evidence, tapes of conversations with Derek, statements from cellmates, surveillance video, he admitted that his brother had hired him to kill Michael for the promise of a large sum of money hidden in one of the accounts. After this incident, the case against Derek became unassailable. He was charged with organized murder, attempted murder of a 10-year-old, and child abuse. Lorraine, in exchange for her confession and testimony against Derek, received a lighter sentence, but also went to prison. Tiffany, after learning of Derek's attempt to kill her real father again, finally turned her back on her stepfather. She began the process of rebuilding her relationship with Michael. Legally, resurrecting Michael Johnson proved to be a complicated process. It took many documents, depositions, and court hearings to overturn the death certificate and restore him to his rights. But Detective Baker helped every step of the way, gathering the necessary evidence and testimony. 6 months later, the court handed down the sentence. Derek received 25 years in prison without parole. Lorraine got 8 years with the possibility of parole in 5. Michael officially gained custody of Tiffany. They moved to a new home, away from Thunderbird Lake and the dark memories associated with it. "I like it here," Tiffany said as she looked around her new room. "But I still can't call you Daddy. I can't yet." "I understand," Michael replied. "You can call me Michael. We'll take our time." Slowly, they began to rebuild their relationship. Michael resumed his career as a swim coach at a local sports center. Tiffany, freed from Derek's brutal control, blossomed. She returned to the music lessons he had forbidden, and even started attending the pool where Michael worked. "Do you want me to teach you how to hold your breath properly underwater?" Michael asked one day, smiling. "It's a family talent." Tiffany smiled back. For the first time in a long time, her smile was genuine. "Yes, I'd like to learn it." One evening, after a particularly successful practice as they were driving home, Tiffany suddenly took Michael's hand. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I remember one thing from when I was a kid. How you taught me how to swim. You used to say, 'Don't be afraid of the water. It's your friend if you respect its power.' I always remembered that, even when I thought you were dead." Michael squeezed her hand tighter, unable to speak from the rush of emotion. "Thanks for coming back," Tiffany said simply. They walked up to the house, and Michael opened the door. There was a new life ahead, without lies, without fear, without decades of silence between them. A life in which the truth, however bitter, was the basis for a new, honest relationship. "Thanks for waiting," Michael replied, and they walked into the house together. Detective Baker, who was watching the scene from her car parked nearby, smiled. Her latest unsolved case had finally gotten closure, not what she had expected, but a much fairer one. She started the car and drove off, leaving father and daughter alone with their new beginning. Michael Johnson, the man who had once faked his death to save himself, was now truly back to life. A real life, full of new opportunities and restored connections. 10 years of silence were over, and now it was possible to start talking about the future.